In the early 1970s, British filmmakers were producing dark, macabre horror movies about twisted people living in rural, isolated areas. And it's these movies that we most commonly now associate with the term folk horror. However, across the Atlantic, American filmmakers such as John Boorman and Sam Peckinpah were also producing horror movies which shared many tropes of the folk horror formula. These movies centred on isolated, remote communities, and particularly on their dangerous, savage residents. But these movies, as with so much of American cinema at this time, had an especially nasty, violent and brutal edge, and still to this day remain some of the most shocking, divisive and controversial movies in mainstream cinema history. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of folk horror, and we discuss John Boorman's Deliverance and Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs.
Okay, you've had your fun.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of folk horror, and this is part 7, in which, as that intro suggested, we're going to be looking at two quite nasty, quite unpleasant movies, Straw Dogs and Deliverance. So strap yourself in. This is going to be an interesting episode with a fair few topics to cover. But before we get started, here are a few contact details. Don't forget, you can email us evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. You can also find us on Instagram now as well. I have joined Instagram. I'm not really sure why I've joined Instagram, but I am on Instagram and I'm going to post updates on there as well. So if you're into Instagram, if you like that kind of thing, follow me there. It's at the Evolution of Horror. Okay, so you can find us on all of those platforms. And don't forget, you can also keep up to date with us on Letterboxd. And that's where we'll be updating week by week what movies we're going to be covering later on this series. So you can make yourself a little list of movies to watch in advance and keep up with the discussion. So that's at Evolution Pod, and that can be found on Letterboxd. But let's get started. Joining me to discuss Deliverance and Straw Dogs, somebody who's never been on the podcast before. Very, very excited to have her here today. She's a film critic and journalist and a huge fan of these types of movies from this era. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast the brilliant Elena Lazic. Elena, hello.
Oh, hello.
Hello. So, first of all, just for people who don't know you, Elena, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
I'm a freelance film writer and also an associate editor at this website called Seventh Row. But yeah, basically freelance film writer, always looking for places to write for and stuff like that. But yeah,
amazing. What kind of a site is Seventh Row? What sort of stuff do you guys do?
So basically, it's this. It's a feminist. It's a Canadian-based, but kind of like we cover films from everywhere. Feminist website where we try to focus on films directed by women and but also in general just films that we think deserve more coverage than they usually get. So when we go to festivals, I try to look for films that interest me, even if they're not like not the big films there. But and we also do a lot of like interviews, because we like with women directors, but also just with people who are concerned with the craft of making a film. So, for example, right now we're doing this special issue on Leave No Trace, Deborah Granick's film, and for that we interviewed her, but also the director of photography and the editor and stuff like that. And it's just really interesting, even just for us. It's like these people don't usually get interviewed that much.
Yes,
It's just fascinating to hear. It's like kind of demystifies the way films are made. It's actually like work and collaborative process. And
I know you always find that, don't you? Like I've gone on a few sort of set visits and things like that, and you always expect it to be so glamorous, and it's just a bunch of people just doing their sort of daily craft sort of job, really, isn't it? And it's
exactly.
Like, it's so kind of mundane and everyday. Yeah, it's really.
But it kind of makes it even more amazing, because it's like, these people work hard and they have ideas and they have to collaborate and communicate ideas to each other. It's like very difficult stuff. But
yeah, totally. I always think it must be quite an intimidating thing being a director and kind of overseeing everything, and not just kind of actors, but also technical crew and kind of thinking about all those different elements in one
exactly.
kind of thing. Leave No Trace is brilliant as well.
Yeah, it's
isn't
amazing.
It? Really great. Yeah. So tell me, what's your opinion on the horror genre? Are you a horror fan?
Well, I wasn't really a horror fan before I met my boyfriend Paul, which you talked to recently.
Who's been on the podcast, to talk about Night of the Hunter with me. Yeah,
he's like a huge horror fan. And before that, it's not that I didn't like horror films, just I didn't watch them because I was very scared.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what they were, and I was just even scared to even try it.
Yeah.
But basically, with him, it took me a long time. It was very hard at the beginning, but I watched like the famous ones, like Texas Chainsaw and Halloween and stuff.
The big ones.
Yeah, and I loved it. And now basically I can watch like pretty much any horror film. Like I watch like Martyrs and stuff like that.
Oh my God.
Trouble Every Day. And it's like,
what did you think of Martyrs?
I really love it. I think it's amazing.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Film. It's just great to have like someone introduce you to something like that, and then you find your own reasons to love it and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's enriched my life in such amazing ways. Like, I think
that's what's quite nice. I mean, what's been really nice is I've got loads of feedback from this podcast about people sort of saying, "Oh, you've introduced me to this and this and this and these types of films." And also, I think a lot of movies that, I think people think straight away of movies like The Shining and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and stuff. But there are lots of movies like the ones we're going to talk about that are sort of on the borderline of horror a lot of the time, and actually are really interesting to talk about in that kind of context as well, which is really good. Yeah. And we're sort of talking actually at the moment about this kind of subgenre of folk horror, which is quite a weird one. I mean, I don't know how aware of it you have been, because also it's like, I think it's not that well known, and also it's kind of usually associated with being very British as well, those kind of old British 70s movies. What are your thoughts on folk horror? Are you a fan of those types of movies?
Well, I never ever heard of it before I watched Wicker Man at school, actually, for Halloween.
Oh, cool.
And I was completely baffled. I was just like, what is this? It's a horror film set in the countryside with like people running around and stuff. I was just really confused about it. But then I realized, like it's a thing, and then I watched Kill List, which I think is incredible. And there's so much interesting stuff going on in folk horror. But it's true that it's a weird genre, because it's kind of, I mean, even if we're talking about the films we're talking now, it's like, is it horror? Or is it just that it's like this horrible story unfolding in a sort of folk setting, meaning literally with like folks, like citizens, people in little communities, usually in the countryside.
Exactly.
Like it's very interesting. I think it's kind of vague enough that you can sort of see what it's about and still cover loads of films. So it's very interesting.
I think that's what it is. It's like no one can really definitively describe it, but it's kind of like, it's a kind of mood, it's a setting, it's a look, it's a style, and you kind of know what it is when you see it.
Yeah.
Okay, you've had your fun. I'll give you one more chance. And if you don't clear out now, there'll be real trouble. I mean it.
This is David Sumner. All his life he's been running away, turning his back on trouble, involvement, and confrontation. Until now.
There are 5 men out there.
I know that. He thought he could find peace and refuge. Instead, he found that a man can't hide forever.
I care. This is where I live. I will not allow violence against this house.
Sam Peckinpah, who uncaged the Wild Bunch, now unleashes Dustin Hoffman in Straw Dogs.
So Straw Dogs, Dustin Hoffman played this mathematician, American, who's married to the character played by Susan George, who's British, and basically she's a bit younger than him, and she's very young, and they're married. I think they've been married quite recently, and they moved back to the UK, to this Cornish village that she's from.
Yeah.
And there are some people she knows there, like her ex-boyfriend and people that she knew from her childhood. And they moved there because Dustin Hoffman's character wants to just do his mathematics in a quiet environment. They have this huge, very old house, farmhouse really. And basically there are lots of tensions between husband and wife. Like, she's very frustrated because he doesn't pay attention to her, and she's bored basically. And but then one day what happens is there's a little girl who goes missing in the village, and all these citizens who are these people living in the village, who are portrayed as quite primal, They go crazy because they're very worried about what happened, and they immediately put the blame on this man who lives in the village who's mentally disabled, just because he's there, really. And they want to kill him, pretty much, especially like the dad of the girl. And by accident, Dustin Hoffman and his wife have this man in their house and they protect him, and then they realize, it's the guy that everyone's looking for, and they want to talk it out with the people in the villages, but obviously that's not what happens. And the villagers want to just destroy the house and come in and kill everyone they have to kill to get this guy and kill him as well. And it's about Dustin Hoffman trying to protect his house and his family. Sorry, that's a very long plot summary.
It's very good.
It's quite a simple story, really.
No, it's great. So what do you think of this film, first of all? Are you a fan of this film?
I am an absolute fan of this film.
Interesting.
I think it's incredible, but obviously then I read about it, and I read what the director said about the female character in it and everything, and I was completely just surprised. I mean, I wasn't surprised because I know that Sam Peckinpah is a problematic director, if you mean by problematic that he's kind of sexist and horrible in many ways.
Right.
But then that doesn't... I think it's fine to watch a film and get what you want from it. And as long as you can make sense of your own emotions and you're not like missing, not purposefully hiding some aspects of the film for your own like story interpretation, I think it's fine. I mean, it's like films belong to the viewers, really, and you can't, whatever the director says, that's nice, but you're not gonna really make me change my mind.
I know, it's kind of irrelevant, I think, a lot of the time what the director says. No, it's so true, actually. I'm gonna ask you a bit more about that later, because that's interesting, because I don't know all about that myself, actually, but obviously Sam Peckinpah, he is this quite controversial director, and this is one of his most controversial films. It seems very divisive, and again, we'll get into this in a bit, but it wasn't received very well by anybody when it first came out. But first of all, just to kind of go back to the sort of beginning, I mean, first of all, like, obviously, you know, when the movie starts, you get these kind of very kind of quaint little rural village shots of these kind of children playing like what looks like some sort of Ring of Roses type thing, and again, it kind of straight away it has a kind of look of sort of folk horror and that kind of thing in the setting. How important do you think it is, the sort of country rural setting of this movie?
I think it's very very important to the film, because the whole, it's not like he just arrives in this place and then there are crazy people coming to kill him. Like the film goes to some extent to try to explain that these people are a community and they have rules and they have a certain way of living. It's not. It's like if he was just in his house and suddenly people come banging on the door and like breaking windows, it wouldn't be the same movie. But this is more about like this community that that Dustin Hoffman's character doesn't fit in at all. And I think it kind of it gives a sense that within that community everything looks normal the way it is.
Yes,
but then when you have an American modern liberal thinking guy arriving, then he has a different view on it, and that's why it's interesting. I think this gap between perceptions.
Definitely, because there is that again. I've droned on about this a lot, but it's like there's this kind of feeling of the everyday, I suppose, about the horror in folk horror, like that people do just live like this every day, and it's only when somebody from the outside comes in and goes, "What the fuck is this?" kind of thing, or is this lifestyle, or what are these people, you know, that it suddenly becomes strange or horror in any way. So Dustin Hoffman, then, you know, as our star, I mean, he was already quite a big star of you know, The Graduate and that kind of thing. So in some ways quite an unusual choice of films for him to star in a way as well. What do you think of him in this movie? Does he do a good job, do you think?
I think he does, but it's very interesting because I think Dustin Hoffman is usually this guy who plays characters who are always like just on the like verge of exploding. Like he moves so much. He's always like jumping around. Like, he can't stay still, and he's got all these tics and very intense movements. Like in Kramer versus Kramer, you're so afraid that he's gonna hurt his child just because that's the way he moves. Like he can't like turn around the kitchen without like throwing everything over the floor and stuff. And you're like, oh my god, like just calm down, like something. And that's just his persona in like even in Tootsie. In Tootsie, he plays this guy who's so temperamental that he like can't get any jobs as an actor. And
I love Tootsie.
And it's like a movie that perfectly uses like what he's good at. But then in this role, I think he's kind of playing against type because he plays this very quiet guy who doesn't want any trouble, and he's like trying to just find peace and quiet. But it's kind of interesting because actually you can tell throughout the film that he's not that. He wants to be that.
Yeah.
He wants to be this quiet guy who's perfectly comfortable with being quiet and doing maths in his house. But he's not that. He's struggling all the time to be like this, not just because of outside pressures, like from his wife being annoying or whatever, or people like bothering him. It's just like he's so... You can tell he's a neurotic person who's always thinking about the way he's doing things. Like he has no chill. Like he's very
he has
intense.
No chill.
And I think that's very key to the film and to the character and to the relationship with his wife. Because if he was just this guy who's just very relaxed and very like, come on guys, we can talk about this. You don't have to break my house. It would be a different film.
Yes.
But actually you can feel that he doesn't really believe those things. He's just doing what he thinks is right. And he's very like conflicted about it. And I think... that's very interesting because the reason I don't know if I should talk about this right now, but I'm just going to say it.
Go for it.
Because basically you can tell throughout watching the film at the beginning, you're like, oh, this guy, he wants to do this and this, but he's struggling so hard and he's so self-involved that basically that's why his wife is mad at him. She's not mad at him because he's not man enough or he doesn't like do something about when they find this dead cat in the cupboard. That's not why she's mad at him. She's mad at him because she can tell that he's not being genuine. And I think that's key. I think that's not probably what Sam Peckinpah thinks, but I think this is what is happening in the film. She can tell that he's just trying to be something he's not, and she's just like, oh my god, just get over it. Just can you try and chill? Can you try and communicate with me and look at me and pay attention to me? But no, you're just so obsessed with the way you should be living your life that you don't see anything that's happening. And I think that's key to the film because then when everything that she does is just her trying to get his attention and get him to actually be living in his house instead of just always being in this narcissistic reflection of what he should be as this modern American man in this British town.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's amazing about the film.
It's so interesting. And it's true, you know, that it is true, like you said, a lot of his performances, Dustin Hoffman has this kind of intensity where, at any moment, you know, he could blow or something could happen. And that is exactly this film, isn't it? It's like this boiling pot, it feels like it's kind of a slow build in a way, and it takes a while for anything quote unquote horror to happen, but you can just feel it kind of brewing under the surface, can't you? And definitely you can see it in his performance.
If you want to help, then get your friends to finish. Get the garage makers and the rat catchers, get them all to finish. And fix the toilet and clean up the kitchen. That would be a terrific help. I love you, Amy, but I want you to leave me alone.
Is he a likable character?
I don't
Is he a
think
sympathetic character? No.
I think he's horrible, like in every way. Like everything he does, even when he saves them, I think he's just being absolutely nightmarish because it's in... okay, I'm just going to say something right now, but I was so curious about how people or even the director perceived this film as the story of this man who needed to remember his masculinity and, you know, and fight off people and stop thinking so much and start like beating up people and become an old man again, you know, like this cliche that I just read the book that is based on, and it gave me a lot of answers about where this idea comes from. Like, okay, how can someone watch Straw Dogs and think, oh yeah, this is a film about a woman who needs to shut up and a man who needs to just start punching people? And
is that what it is? Is that what Sam Peckinpah kind of thinks?
Because I think that's what it's supposed to be. You know, at the end when he's managed to like kill one or two of them, and he's like 2 to go, one down, 2 to go. Like I think this is supposed to be like, whoa, what a badass guy.
Right? Yeah.
But then I was like, no, this is just sad. Like he's just so stupid because that is not horrible. That is horrible. I mean, obviously it's good that he killed them because I mean it's not good that he killed them, but it's good that he protected his house. But that he's missing half the picture.
Yeah, he does. He seems to do everything all wrong, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't help his wife when she really needs it throughout the bulk of the film, and then all of a sudden he turns into this cowboy at the end, and why as well? It's like just because his home is under threat, or because and
because he has this idea because he's throughout the book, and I think probably throughout the film, but you don't have the access to his interior monologue. But throughout the book, which is called The Siege of Trench's Farm, which I think is horrible and reactionary and quite amazing to read. Throughout the book, he's already thinking about the differences between the British and the American, and between being a civilized man and a real primal man who's just using his fist all the time. So he's already thinking about this all the time. So then when all this happens, this is the way he chooses to interpret it as, I need to be a man again and just give up, and this is good. This is good. This is a good thing, and I have to stop asking so many questions that torture me. Like, it's all about himself. It's all about himself. It's never about protecting his wife. He doesn't like his wife. In the book, it's insane. Like, he like slaps her. He's always saying, "You're so annoying. Just go away. Just stop being horrible." And she's portrayed as horrible, but there's no insight into why she's like this.
Wow.
But in the film, I think the whole film is about his wife.
Yeah, definitely. It's not that cut and dry in the film, is it? I mean, it does have elements of all of that, and that's why I think it is quite an uncomfortable watch, and a lot of people don't like it, I think, for that reason, because I think you're not quite sure how you're supposed to feel watching it, and we'll get into the whole rape scene as well at some point, but especially, and the way that you start off and think, okay, maybe he's just this kind of slightly poor, this poor kind of slightly passive guy who's kind of caught in this trap of all of these kind of thugs, but then the more you get to know him, it's like, oh, actually, he's pretty vile and dismissive to his wife, and he's quite kind of passive aggressive towards her and disrespectful of her, and kind of does everything wrong basically in every step of the way, doesn't he? And again, it's that really kind of interesting sort of gender stuff going on between them. There's that conversation they have where, you know, there's that sort of horrible leery shot as she's getting out of the car, and the builders are looking at her and looking up her skirt, and then she sort of says it to Dustin Hoffman. She said that they were doing this, and he just sort of goes, well, maybe you shouldn't dress like that. And then she says, oh, well, maybe if you knew how to hammer some nails and work on a roof like like a real man. And again, it's like these kind of neither of them kind of are how that their gender should be, or something in some ways, according to the other one, aren't they?
I think this moment is very early in the film, right? This is when she comes out of the car. I think it's very telling, because instead of saying this man shouldn't look at you like this, like you should be able to dress the way you want, which you would think in the 70s, which is when the film was made, this would be, this is the attitude. This is like women should be able to like not wear bras without having to worry about men like attacking their house and stuff. And he just says, no, you should dress differently. And so I think her answer and everything she does afterwards, because it's all a provocation on her part. I think she's provoking him because she's mad at him.
Damn rat catcher's staring at me.
Why don't you wear a bra?
Why should I?
Shouldn't go around without one and not expect that type to stare.
Look at... If you could hammer a nail, Venner and Scott wouldn't be out there.
Everything she says when she's like, you should hammer nails, I think she says that because she knows that he's anxious about this, and she's like, okay, if I'm gonna be the woman who should be dressed like very properly and just hiding always in her house with no freedom, then you should be the man protecting me. You should be, if you want to play it like that, then okay, sure, but then you have to be a real man. You can't afford, if I'm gonna be hiding in the house, if this is the way you perceive the world, then you should be the one who's protecting me with your strength and not your brains and your math fucking school academic stuff. and it's just like, I think she's just provoking him, and she's not actually telling him to be like this. She just knows the buttons to push.
She's just prodding him. It's interesting. What do you think of her as well then? Because again, I read that Dustin Hoffman originally wasn't happy with the casting of Susan George as Amy, because he said she had too much of a kind of Lolita look almost, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, what do you think of her and her performance and her portrayal of Amy?
Well, I'm actually, I mean, she does have a Lolita look, but I think that just makes her more interesting, because in the book, it's not all the same. It's like she's older, she's kind of the same age as him, and they've got a daughter, so she's like a mom, completely different. But I think it's way more interesting what we've done here, which is she's really young, and it kind of, you can see why this is why he treats her like she's a child all the time.
Yes.
And it's horrible for her. I mean, I don't know, it's just this idea of being married and supposedly in love, and they're supposed to be on the same page, but he's always treating her as inferior, like a child, and she can't stand it, which is completely fair, I think. And it's just, I think it's amazing that she's this Lolita character, but that's why he thinks she's so inferior, and she's not educated like him. I think in the film it's suggested that she's a bit, I mean, it's not even that she's not, that's the thing, he thinks that she's too stupid to understand maths.
Yes.
And everything
he's so belittling
he's doing.
of her, isn't he?
He's so patronizing. But then maybe she doesn't understand the maths, but that doesn't mean she's stupid. But he just assumes she is, and he's like, okay, just go play and leave me alone, do my maths. And she's just so frustrated by that, because his husband shouldn't talk like that to his wife, except if he's this old patronizing cliche that he thinks he's not. But she's like, no, you are this patronizing cliche. Can you please stop doing that? And she doesn't know how to do it, upset by provoking him, because he's just not listening to her.
Yeah, and there's this certain element as well of like, now that they're in her old hometown, it's like she kind of has a little bit more power in that she knows all of the people, she knows all of the men. Everyone seems to kind of still like and respect her, and yet he's the real outsider in this whole situation, doesn't it? Which makes him feel like an even smaller man, I think, in this whole scenario.
But that's why at the end, when he fights them off, it's for him, and I think for the perspective of Sam Peckinpah, it's him taking back the control, because he's an outsider, but he's like, okay, this is my house, you can't get into my house, and Susan George, you're not the boss of me, you're not the boss of this situation, I'm the one taking care of control. And so he perceives it that way, but obviously that is such a simplistic way of perceiving things, and it's just, I mean, everything, it's not that everything that happens is his fault, but he really doesn't help. I think basically what's very, 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 very interesting about this film is, and a major difference from the book, is that in the book, as horrible and reactionary as it is, there is no rape scene.
There's no rape in the book.
Yeah, which is incredible to me, because you would think that would be the most horrible thing that someone can write. You know, like, this horrible man did this to this woman. Like, but that's not in the book. And then when you watch the film, I think the editing in that scene when she gets attacked by her boyfriend, and her ex-boyfriend, and then by this other man, it's edited to suggest that while her husband is being pathetic out hunting, because he's supposed to go on a hunt, but he's so terrified, he's just like sitting in the bush looking around him, terrified. While he's doing this, she is being attacked. First she thinks she's enjoying it, or it's kind of ambiguous, but then she's actually attacked by someone, like she doesn't want this. And so it's to suggest that, he's not being a good husband, he should go and be protecting her right now, he's being a pathetic man, he needs to shoot, he needs to be strong, he needs to use his fist. But I think if you actually watch the scene, the addition of this rape scene that he never finds out about, the husband
never knows it happened,
happens. So I think what's very interesting is the fact that he doesn't know it happens, and everything he does, he thinks he's protecting her, but he doesn't know that this happens. So how much does he actually care about her? He sees her distressed, he doesn't notice, he doesn't ask, he's just like, she's being pathetic again, she's being a child, she's being crying about something stupid, but no, that something actually happened to her. And he doesn't care, he doesn't notice. So throughout this attack at the end on the house, you're watching it, and he thinks he's being this hero, but you know that actually he's not protecting her. He's just protecting his own image of who he thinks he should be. And she's just like, oh my God, my husband is a horrible guy who doesn't care about me and only cares about his image of himself, and is completely neurotic and just wants to like kill some guys.
Yeah.
And I think it's so amazing that this scene wasn't in the original very reactionary book. But then Sam Peckinpah adds it, thinking it makes it probably more reactionary, because what he said himself was he thought that, it's horrible what he said. He said the character, she basically needs this rape so that she finds her place, basically. It's horrible. He thinks like she just needs a good rape, and then she'll be sorted, and she needs to stop like whining all the time. That's actually
what it is?
It's just monstrous. So you don't know if he's like actually like, if he means this, because it's so horrible. You're like, are you kidding?
Just being controversial?
Are you for real? Like, this is crazy. But anyway, this is what he thinks. And there's a way where you can, if you consider the way, if you juxtapose the scene with Dustin Hoffman being pathetic in the forest,
yes, it kind of cuts back and forth.
You can see that's probably what he means. But then if you consider the fact that Dustin Hoffman never finds out about this attack on his wife, then it changes everything. It means he doesn't care about her, and she's just traumatized. She's not like put back in her place. She's just traumatized, and she's like, I don't care about this anymore. Just give them this mentally disabled man. I don't care. I don't want to suffer anymore. Can you please do that? And he thinks she's being pathetic, but she's just traumatized. Something actually happened to her.
Give them Niles, David.
They'll beat him to death.
I don't care. Get him out!
You really don't care, do you?
But the film is just amazing that they added this scene, thinking it would make it more horrible and reactionary, but actually I think it makes it so much more interesting and in a way progressive and all about her.
Interesting. Well, what about the way that the rape is actually portrayed then? Because again, I find it quite horrible and uncomfortable in the way that it almost has a kind of no means yes type of a message. I think, you know, like the kind of, it is a rape, but then she seems to start enjoying it and wanting it. And then it kind of goes to a second rape that is then horrible again. But it's a very kind of tonally really weird, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I think it's very dangerous to try and put like one meaning on that scene, because I think it's kind of meant to be. I mean, whatever Sam Peckinpah says, it's just admit we don't care what he said.
Yes, it's not. It's irrelevant.
I think it's not. It's this scene that's not meant to mean one thing. It's not, it's kind of like an experience. I mean, it's not like you can tell the way someone who's being attacked this way should react. Like there's whatever, people just react the way they have to react. It doesn't matter. But I think the way I interpret it is that I think throughout the film, even up until this point and after, and throughout the entire film, she just can't get the attention of her husband or anyone. And I think that's also why she was provoking the men, you know, wearing no bra in the town and everything. She just wants people to like pay attention to her and notice that she's here. But obviously in this scene, what's very interesting is that she's being attacked by her ex-boyfriend, who is a handsome guy that we can understand they had something when they were quite young going on. And so I think at first she's like, oh, like this isn't the terms of a normal sexual encounter, obviously. But then I think there's this moment where she's probably, it's interesting because you could interpret the intercuts to her husband as her thinking about her husband and being like, this guy is out there, he doesn't care about me, he doesn't listen to me. But this man who I had a real relationship with, who wasn't like Dustin Hoffman, who was like not a real man, but someone who was like honest about himself.
Yes.
He notices me. And he's the one, he went to my house. Obviously, he's attacking her, but I think there's a certain dimension when she's just reminiscing in a way about a time when her boyfriend or a man was actually noticing her and in a way caring about her. Yeah. Because obviously he's raping her because there's no initial consent, but he's not being insanely brutal with her. He's in a way quite gentle. So it's a horrible situation. It's very complex, but I think it's about her because she's so traumatized and hurt by her husband paying no attention to her that she's not happy that this is happening, but she finds this one way of escaping the horror by thinking, oh, at least this man is paying attention to me. I think this is what's happening. And that's why it's interesting that then they added this other rape by this stranger man.
Yes. And then it's
friend,
like,
and she's like, oh no, this is
actually
completely
horrific.
horrible. I don't want this at all. She's not enjoying that at all. Because I think it has different meaning because it's not like her ex-boyfriend.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the way I see it. And I think it's interesting that there are so many ways to interpret this scene and the way it's edited and the way it's shot. But he's an interesting character, the ex-boyfriend character, isn't he?
Yeah. He is the anti Dustin Hoffman in a way, isn't he? He's kind of simpler, but he's this big, good-looking, like brutish type, isn't he? Who's kind of quite a sort of few words and sort of does what he wants and gets what he wants, kind of thing. And again, it's like, you know, how much of a monster is he supposed to be portrayed as in this film as well is quite interesting, because there are these kind of more sort of sympathetic moments with him as well at times in the way he interacts with her. But then obviously he's also a rapist and a thug, and you know, so it is it's all of these kind of strange interpretations that make this film such a like interesting but an uncomfortable watch, I think. And
but it's so amazing because actually if you think about this rape with this ex-boyfriend, it's a classic instance of, you know, those horrible scenes in films where it's like, oh, no means yes because she wants attention. Like this is, I think my interpretation is that like she wants the attention of the guy. But because of the context of the husband who thinks he's so progressive and modern, but actually is horrible to her, it doesn't make it okay, but it kind of gives it a more interesting context than just she's a woman and she wants attention. Like, no, that's not what the case. The case is she's a very, very hurt woman who's completely constantly patronized by her husband, and she's so desperate. She's back in her house. She thought she would have an amazing time being back in her childhood village, but she's having this horrible time because the husband she married doesn't care about her and thinks that she's a child. And so it kind of it gives an amazing context to this classic no means yes situation. So I think it's incredible feat of writing.
It does seem like it was a very kind of nihilistic sort of time at this point as well. If you take other movies that came out this same year, even 1971, you've got, The French Connection and Last House on the Left, A Clockwork Orange. There were a lot of these kind of really just kind of nasty, brutal movies that kind of always end in a way that is like, there is no happy ending. There is no good guy, bad guy. Everyone is good. Everyone is bad. Everyone is fucked up. Where everyone is just animalistic almost in this kind of weird way.
They're often about people who think they're good and then find themselves in a situation where they realize that they're not that good.
Yeah,
Which
totally.
It's amazing, but I think that's why like these films I think should come back now, because it was at a time of like activism and everyone being like, very righteous, like, oh, I'm against Vietnam, I'm against this, I'm against
exactly
that, I'm feminist. But actually most people obviously were hypocrites, which is always the case. Like, they just want to look good, like like the Dustin Hoffman character, he thinks he's such a modern American man. In the book it is even worse. He's like described as a guy who would like sign petitions against death penalty and always very activist in this way, like sign a petition way activist. And so it's amazing that it's like it's these films that destroy this hypocrisy and
definitely
analyze it in such an amazing way. And I mean, it's brutal, it's very like nihilistic, but I think important.
So. And it is interesting. I think there is always that element of it. We'll get to this with Deliverance as well, that there is, yes, a lot of the time these kind of rural, hillbilly, redneck types, whatever you want to call them, they are portrayed as, these kind of, slightly weird, monstrous people, but also these kind of liberal urban types who are always arrogant and narrow-minded and stupid as well, in a way, and kind of think they can do or get away with whatever and then are punished for it as well. It is kind of everyone is bad, in these
their
kind
own
of
special
movies.
way.
Exactly. It's the same with Texas Chainsaw. It's like, well, they're the ones that keep wandering into this house,
they think they can just come here and like, because they think they're better than everyone else, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. And also, what is interesting, because I kind of associate this movie as well with kind of what you might call the sort of rape revenge movies in a way, but of course it kind of isn't really, because like you say, Dustin Hoffman's character never knows there is a rape, so actually he is not taking revenge on anything like that.
He's just enacting his own desire to be like primal, like man or whatever. He's just like acting out of pride.
Did you watch recently Revenge?
Yes, I watched it a lot. I wrote about it a lot. Love it. Amazing.
It's wonderful, wasn't it? Really, really good. And I spoke to the director for the podcast actually as well, and that was really interesting. And again, it kind of it played on those kind of tropes of is she asking for it because she's dressing like this and doing this and provoking them and that kind of thing. And it's definitely an interesting subject. And I think you're right. Like right now, I think these types of movies are starting to creep back in. I think that even whether or not you call these things folk horror in any way, but folk horror is something that is very nihilistic, usually quite godless, usually has something quite bad to say about belief and religion and people, and that's coming back as well in movies like The Witch and Kill List and all these things. There seems to be a bit of a resurgence, so it does feel like there is definitely a kind of trend depending on what's really going on in the world, I suppose. I
think it makes sense. And
I'm interested, like, what do you think of it in terms of if you strip away the kind of subtext and that kind of thing as a piece of entertainment, I suppose, do you find it exciting? Do you find it thrilling? Do you find it scary? Does it work in that very sort of simple context?
I think it does. I mean, there are amazing bits of when Dustin Hoffman's trying to protect his home, and there's this bit where he like throws boiling water on them. You're like, oh my god, like imagine doing this. Imagine you're in your house and you just make some water boil and you throw on someone. Like, and I think there's that element. I mean, that pure entertainment element. Obviously he's being horrible, whatever, but like I think that pure entertainment element really works. And I think Sam Peckinpah is really good at doing that, because he's also got this weird editing style and like very interesting, very
it's quite
fast-paced,
jarring, isn't it?
Which I think actually makes it very exciting.
I agree. So, I feel like everything in the movie, and it's same with Texas Chainsaw Massacre actually, everything about it is kind of jarring and kind of scuzzy. It's like a word I could think of, like the look of it. It's kind of grainy and shaky, and the editing almost seems deliberately a bit off at times.
Yes.
And in that sort of final act where the home invasion happens, the constant smashing of windows and things being destroyed and thrown through the windows, and the editing, it is really like you're kind of really uncomfortable and tense watching it, aren't you? It's really well, and in that regard, I think it is really well directed, because I think the film does creep up on you a little bit like movies like The Wicker Man or whatever, where even though nothing horrific happens until near the end, something is off. You're kind of finding yourself getting more and more tense and uncomfortable as it goes on.
But it's amazing. That's why it's so amazing. It's like it's also just an experience. It's not just, I mean, we talked about ideas and stuff, but it's also like just such an experience, like watching it. And it's all because it's about also like survival and trying not to die and stuff. There are all these very tense moments where you're just actually worried about like someone's safety, and like, it's like it's an action film in a way.
It is.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. And those kind of home invasion movies always freak me out as well. I mean, they do with everyone, don't they? I mean, it's just a horrible scenario, and the fact that they're so cut off and in the middle of nowhere. And again, that kind of feeling of, there's not really anyone to turn to, because you feel like this whole community is against them in a way, in a weird way.
It's amazing actually, because I think it's so much more interesting that in the film they don't try to explain why no one really comes to help, because it makes it more scary, whereas in the book there's this snowstorm happening, which like there's loads of boring bits talking about the snowstorm and people can't get through the snow, and just like, okay, just get rid of that, make it even more evil, like people just don't come help you. You're just alone. And that just makes it so much scarier.
Definitely. What are your thoughts on that? What sort of place did you grow up in? Were you a sort of country person? Are you very much a city girl?
Well, actually, I grew up in like a small town, but every summer I used to go back to my family in Bosnia and Croatia, which is very rural. Especially Bosnia. It's like people living on farms, and they make money from like cutting wood and stuff, and like having a truck. So it's quite similar. And I mean, they're lovely people. I mean, obviously they're not like this, and I'm sure there are people like this as well. I mean, this is like every nuance of experience. But it's true that it's always like a very jarring experience, going in there. And it's true that every time I would go there, I would feel very stupid. I would feel like, I think I'm so clever and stuff, but I can't like wake up at 6 to like pick up the eggs and stuff. Like I would just be like, oh my god, like I think I'm so modern, I can't make an omelette. It's horrible. But it's true that there is this big like you find yourself like being like a bad subhuman, not even like a real person, because you can't do these basic things. So I think it's a very, very interesting aspect, actually.
You're right, because you could be the strongest, you could be the cleverest mathematician or whatever, but actually when you just have to regress to living off the land and use your sort of base animal instincts to survive, how good would people like us be at that? I'd be terrible. I wouldn't last a day in that kind of environment in straw dogs.
Every time my cousins are like go take the sheep and stuff, I'm just oh my god, you do that every day? This is amazing. I'm exhausted. But also the sense of community, like they have a real sense of community.
Everyone knows everyone.
Exactly. And it's I mean, it's not scary. It's like the idea that they all like stick together no matter what. That's not true. Like there's just loads of gossip. It's amazing. But it's true that we don't. I mean, living in the city, you don't have that real sense of like, your neighbors, and you all say hello, and you have like coffee and tea and stuff. It's very different. But it's kind of you're kind of envious for that thing when you arrive.
It's the polar opposite, isn't it? In the city, it's like you're surrounded by people all the time, but you're completely on your own. No one really talks to each other. No one helps each other. Really, there's not really a sense of community anywhere. It is like every man for themselves, really.
And it turns you into this narcissistic type, just like the Dustin Hoffman character who's always thinking about, what am I? What is man? What is it? It's just thinking of like real life, like people, immediate surroundings, like what are you doing? Do something, pay attention to people. So it's...
really interesting. Now, very quickly, I haven't seen it, but have you seen the remake?
No, I haven't.
No, good. Neither of us bothered. It is. I mean, all I've heard is bad stuff about it, and I know that there were a wave of, again, at that point, sort of early 21st century, there were a lot of remakes. There was a remake of Last House on the Left, a remake of I Spit on Your Grave, and Texas Chainsaw, and I saw a couple of them, and I remember seeing the Last House on the Left one and just thinking, well, what's the point, really? It does sort of solve a lot of the problems of the original in a way, and it makes it easier to watch, and it's glossier, and looks better and the acting is maybe a bit better. But when you take away all of that kind of context, what's the point really? Then you're just watching a kind of quite unpleasant story made in a very kind of conventional Hollywood way, in a way.
It's a shame, because I think there should be a comeback of stories like this, like of people thinking they're amazing and then they meet someone and they realize like, oh, they don't know how to deal with things. Like that. I think that people should make that happen, but not through remakes. Just make your new film, make a new movie. Or if you make a remake, give a very interesting, new take. I'm not like opposed to remakes. I'm very excited about the new Halloween.
Oh yeah, me too.
I don't know what they're gonna do with this. Yes, I don't know what they're gonna do. I mean, I think Halloween is amazing. Yeah, don't need to change it, but there are ways you can make things like more relevant, and not relevant, but just more like updated to the stuff we're doing now. I think it's But yeah, people should make more films like this. This is a call for filmmakers to make more films like this.
Do more stuff like again. This. I do think, and I keep talking about this with people as well, that 70s was the best era of filmmaking. And there's just this feeling at this sort of time where these directors were just doing whatever the fuck they wanted and didn't care.
Can you imagine someone making Straw Dogs now? No. Like, oh yeah, this is the story about this famous actor living in a countryside house, and then like his house is attacked and he has to fight off hillbillies. No, I don't think this would happen. Not with a huge actor like Dustin Hoffman.
No, you'd never get this. Also, just seeing this A-list star in a Cornish village in the middle of England, it's so weird as well. That is what makes it feel
it's like,
even more
if you
strange.
think about it at the time, probably people were like, oh yeah, Dustin Hoffman, great, like that's just what he does. But now if you have like some, I don't know, even like some actor like Oscar Isaac doing that, you're like, oh my god, like this is incredible. And
exactly.
And you just wouldn't have that really realist like handheld style. You just wouldn't. I don't think.
No, definitely not.
That's why Kill List was so exciting.
Oh, Kill List is again, it's that feeling of kind of slightly unsafe filmmaking where you don't really know what this film is you're watching and where it's going. I think that's what I love about a lot of these movies, because you're put in a completely unsafe space. It feels like.
But that's why they don't get made, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's move on then. Let's go on to Deliverance.
Are there any hillbillies up there anymore, Lewis?
Yeah, there's some people up there that ain't never seen a town before. No bigger than Aintree, anyway. Those woods are real deep. The river's inaccessible, except a couple of points.
How are we going to get there, Lewis? Wait,
cancel my tickets. I'm going to take you there.
Well, what the hell do you know about canoeing, for Christ's sake?
I know enough about canoeing to handle both of them.
I don't know what that means, but I'm willing to go along with you, Lou. Listen, we're into it. We're gonna go.
This is the last chance we got to see this river. You just wait till you feel that white water under you, Bobby. Ain't that right?
I don't know.
Tell me
about
about
ready.
I don't know much about it, but I'm willing to be.
So it's the story of these 4 city men who go up a mountain. I don't remember which state it is, but
no,
they go up.
I don't know if it's ever specified. Actually, I think it's like almost like a fictional river in a fictional.
Because they want to go canoeing down a stream, like down a very quite intense. I think I don't know anything about canoeing, so throughout the film I was wondering, this looks really difficult, but
I think it is supposed to be.
Why do they let these actors do this? But basically, these actors in the 70s would just go canoe. Like for a film, that's fine. Like just take risks like this. But anyway, they go up this mountain because they want to canoe down the river, and so they go up by car, and they want to leave their cars with these basically hillbillies, people who are all cast because they have weird faces, and like you can tell, like okay, this is straight up like saying that they're all like.
Completely backwards inbred.
Inbred. And you're like, okay, great, amazing. But they want to leave them their car so that these people can drive them down, so that when the 4 men arrive down the river, they can find their car and go away. But they up there on the mountain, when they meet those people, they're a bit weird. Some of them are a bit hostile. And they decide to just kind of ignore it and just be like, okay, fine, like they're just weird hillbillies. Like they're very patronizing to them. They're not very. They really treat them like weird oddities instead of people. And these people obviously can feel that, and that's why they don't like city boys. And then at some point they go down the river, but they have to stop every time to like sleep and just rest. And at some point 2 of them, so John Voight and the other actor, I don't
what's his name, is it Beatty, is it Ned Beatty?
I think it's Ned Beatty.
It's Ned Beatty.
They get not captured, but like at gunpoint stopped by these 2 hillbillies that they saw earlier, I think. and one of them ties up John Voight to a tree, and they rape the other man. And then suddenly Burt Reynolds arrives, and he kills the rapist, and then the other one runs away, and they don't know what to do. They decide, okay, so what do we do? Do we go to the police, or do we bury this body, because anyway it's gonna be all underwater in a few months because there's this big environmental project happening. And it's all about this conflict about do you want to be follow the rules of the law of the state, of society, civilization, or do you think you can get away with it by virtue of just being better better than the others, and you don't deserve this, you don't deserve to have to go to court and defend yourself and talk about this brutal attack that happened to you. And then it's all like a survival story, basically, when they're going down the river and trying not to be killed by the other
the other guy pursuing
guy. And it's quite intense, and there are some great performances and great display of various kinds of masculinities at work, which is very interesting. And
I think that's what's quite interesting, especially in comparison to Straw Dogs, is that it's this kind of, it feels like there are these kind of two sides of masculinity in this. Burt Reynolds' character is very much like the alpha male, isn't he?
He's so annoying.
He's so annoying.
I hate him so much.
He's the most arrogant, like, kind of jock type man, isn't he?
And he thinks he's like close to nature. And there's this amazing bit where he thinks he hears a noise, and then one of them thinks, he's close to nature, and the other one goes, no, he thinks he is, but he has no idea what he's doing. He's just a city boy who thinks it makes him more of a man to be like close to the elements or something. You're like, oh my god, what a horrible, annoying guy. And he's always being horrible to the nice Ned Beatty guy, because Ned Beatty is a bit rounder. He's not as athletic.
He's not as alpha male.
He's a bit scared. He doesn't. I mean, canoeing is scary. Like, you give him a break. But Reynolds is always horrible to him. Like, there's an amazing bit where he just completely interrupts him. Doesn't listen to what he's saying and just says his bit about nature on a lake or whatever. And everyone's just forced to listen to him go on about his weird poetry about nature. And just like, oh my god, just give me a break, you're horrible. Anyway, but he's not too much in the film after a while, so it's nice.
No, weirdly, he's not, is
like,
he? No, he's not.
Very thankful for that.
It's interesting. You've got him as the alpha male. You've got Ned Beatty, who's very much the opposite, isn't he? He's the kind of sensitive man, and obviously he's the one who gets raped as well, which is an interesting choice of the four of them. And I think the other character is interesting, the one who dies, Ronnie Cox's character Drew, who kind of again is this kind of thinks of himself as this nice guy, but is very patronizing. Even in the dueling banjo scene where he wants to play with the other guy, it's almost like he's treating him like an animal or a child or something. Like he's very much like, come on, boy,
a circus thing.
Exactly.
Come on, I'm with you.
And actually, the boy is brilliant. The boy who plays the banjo is incredible.
Yeah, I think he's playing for real.
He's playing.
If you look at his fingers, amazing.
He's playing for real. He's doing an amazing. I mean, that scene is incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
It basically feels like a kind of really simple, beautiful kind of musical way of summing up the difference between these two cultures in a way. This kind of idiot liberal with his acoustic guitar who takes it round with him to play, and then this other guy, and he's so funny because he plays incredibly, but his face is just like giving him total shade the whole way through, isn't he? Like, get the fuck out of here kind of thing. And
I think at the beginning he's smiling, but then by the end he's just refusing to even shake his hand.
He just doesn't want anything to do with it.
It's amazing. And he's just, and the city guy is just completely like clueless. He's like, oh, you want to play more? Like, what's wrong? Like, and you can't even keep up with him.
I love it. It's an amazing.
And that's why
piece
this
of music.
song becomes like the theme throughout the film.
Yes,
It's quite brilliant. Yeah,
it is really brilliant. It is, and it kind of sums it up. And again, folk. I mean, that is the most folky folk of things, isn't it? That is folk music, and it's wonderful. Yeah. So you saw this for the first time for this podcast, didn't you? What did you think of it? Did you enjoy it?
I really enjoyed it, but obviously I knew what that there was this scene.
Yes.
And I was trying not to just think, okay, when is it happening? Because you're just always wondering, like, okay, how do we do it? Like, why are people always talking about it? And it was very interesting actually just to watch the rest, because everything there are these amazing like foreshadowing moments that are like not subtle,
Yes,
but also
yes.
but also those just to see. I didn't know that it was about all these different. It's basically about toxic masculinity.
It is
because
yeah.
there are no women,
No
and it's
women.
just these 4 men between each other, and also with these 2 dangerous hillbillies as well, and they all just portray men who don't know what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to be doing, and how they're supposed to be, and how modern they're supposed to be, and stuff like that. And it's very interesting just to watch them interact, these 4 men. It's like 4 bros from the city.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, let's go canoeing, but obviously one of them doesn't really like canoeing, the other one's just very macho about it, and the other one's just following his brother because he loves his brother. John Voight is playing Burt Reynolds' brother, and I think John Voight's performance in this film is just incredible,
exceptional. Yeah,
it's
what
amazing.
It's an amazing cast actually.
It's such a
guys.
it's such a vulnerable performance. Like I don't usually associate him with like very nice guys like this, like very like eyes wide open, just kind of not. He's kind of our anchor throughout the film, and I think he's just amazing. Like the way he manages to make this character believable and not weirdly not like pathetic or like one dimensional.
Yeah,
it's really. What an incredible performance.
And I think, he is the character he's the hero, really, I suppose, isn't he? And I wonder whether this is why, and we'll get to this, but this film had a much more positive reaction than Straw Dogs. Obviously, they are very different movies, but in some ways they deal with a lot of the same themes. They both have quite controversial, explicit rape scenes. They both have quite extreme violence. They're both these kind of weird sort of toxic masculinity, quite nihilistic. But this movie was, one of the biggest grossing movies of that year. It was a year later, 1972. It got positive reviews across the board. It got nominated for Oscars. It got nominated for Best Picture, Best Director. Was absolutely loved by everyone. And I think it's just a little bit easier to kind of say, look, these are our good guys and these are our bad guys in a way, isn't it? Yeah. It's a little bit less murky than Straw Dogs in a way.
Yeah, because you have this one John Voight character who I don't think does anything wrong.
No,
ever.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's kind of the one who's not. I mean, him and Ned Beatty character who are just trying to be nice guys.
Yeah.
And even the one who gets killed, he's trying to be.
Yeah.
He hasn't. I mean, he's a bit naive, but he hasn't he's not as patronizing as
exactly
Burt Reynolds and
then you've got, like you say, on the other side, these hillbillies are literally monstrous. Like the way that they look, the way that they're portrayed.
We don't get introduced at all. It's like the opposite of Straw Dogs. We don't get introduced at all to like their life and the city life or like. And it's not really. They're not really. It's not a community because the nice hillbillies that they meet at the beginning, they're not like those guys. They're actually quite nice. Like they have their car at the end. They're like, yeah, here's your car. Like, you're right. They call the ambulance and stuff. But these 2 guys, they're just plain villains who just like go into the forest looking for like stupid stuff to do. And so it's like easier like that way. But also just the film in general, I think is just less purposefully unpleasant. I think Straw Dogs is made to be unsettling and like horrible. You come out, you need a shower, you're like, oh my god, like horrible and tense and a horrible time. But it's amazing. It's an amazing film, but you have a horrible time. Whereas this one, there's more of like a nice arc to it, which is like, you start from this place, and then the John Voight character, he had obviously to do some horrible things, but he learned something, and
they all go on journeys.
There is a way where you can learn something. There's an end there's a sort of end to the story, and you can. I mean, he's traumatized, and he has these nightmares about like what he's done, but there is this way where you progress and like, things get resolved and in a nicer way than in Straw Dogs.
Yeah, definitely. It is, and it is interesting because it does have those kind of elements of like a survival, sort of movie, action movie almost. Those kind of those incredible river rafting scenes are amazing as the actors are all going through the rapids and everything. And it's really well filmed, really well edited. Again, I think it got nominated for an Oscar for Best Editing.
Wow.
It's really kind of slickly done, all of those sort of action set pieces, isn't it? But also it does have a feeling of like a proper horror movie. Even, these kind of... even like a kind of like I Know What You Did Last Summer style, we've killed this man, let's bury the body, let's all keep it a secret, and then it kind of comes back and to haunt them kind of thing. And that last dream sequence where the hand comes out of the lake, I mean, for anyone I think who would argue that this isn't a horror film, that is a pure horror film image,
the hand
isn't
coming
it?
back, that's true,
and that's all over the posters and the DVD boxes and everything, and I think it in so many ways is is a horror film.
Yeah.
You know? It's really interesting. You know, I talked about this with Paul actually, because we talked about The Night of the Hunter, and I think what's, you know, when it comes to these kind of American rural movies rather than British, the landscape is so much more dangerous and threatening than British. I think with British it's more about small isolated communities, whereas in America it's like you are battling everything. Like this, it's vast and dangerous. It's the same with the kind of Australian outback movies as well, like Wolf Creek and that type of thing, where you've got like actually the river, the landscape, the mountains, everything kind of adds to the danger of this film as well, doesn't it?
But that's why I think it's Straw Dogs. Straw Dogs really, like, when I saw it, I fall by a lot because of all those things that you're saying. It's like it's in the Cornwall.
Yeah,
it's in like the Cornish village. There's nothing.
There's nothing there,
and that adds to the atmosphere. It's like it's this total desolation, total emptiness. Like it's like the void. It's like so everyone's just bored.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And it really adds to the horrible atmosphere. And like just you feel. You're watching, you're like, oh my god, like how can people live that way? Why are they living there? Obviously, you go insane living there. Yeah. Whereas, I mean, American landscapes, pretty much all American landscapes, even if you make a film, you know, in like a Western.
Exactly.
It's empty, but there's so much going on. Like it's not this sense of desolation the same way. This sense of like, this was once a great place for like a battle or something, but now it's forgotten. Like it's more like there's still history there. There's still stuff. There's still danger. There's still like things going on.
Exactly.
And that's why like films set in the British countryside are just like, so it's so unpleasant. It's just like it's all emptiness and history that's just forgotten and like it's just rot.
I think that's what it is. Yeah, but with British history, there's a sense of history all around and old, and there's like. A lot of the time in folk, it's the danger is what could be lurking beneath the soil or these kind of weird Stonehenge type rocks or whatever it might be. Whereas with America, it's like there's actually very little history. There's very little here.
Yeah, the
it
danger
is just
barren.
Present. Yes, exactly.
It's like right now.
Yeah,
it's not from the past, really.
You know, now we've seen 1,000,001 types of these types of movies like Deliverance, even you know, from Texas Chainsaw onwards. Movies recently, Wrong Turn. You know, everything. There were 100. The Hills Have Eyes. These kind of what a lot of people call exploitation type movies, where it's usually set in the deep south. Bunch of kind of liberal city folk wander in, and then you know, with their arrogance, kind of don't know what they're getting themselves into, I suppose. But I mean, this is one of the originals, and it's so well done actually as well. And I think again, a lot of these types of movies evolve into being kind of grisly, kind of straight to video exploitation movies, but this one was a big deal with all these A-list stars and everything as well.
I don't know how. I mean, it's again like you can't make a film like this now. Not just because of the canoeing, which I don't think any actor would agree to do now.
No,
it looks very dangerous.
Yeah,
maybe it's easy. I don't know, but it looks very dangerous. But just because it's like this story just set in the nature, and it's just not something quite simple happens. But, like, I don't think these films get made.
I was thinking of the closest equivalent, and I'd say maybe The Revenant is kind of that. You know what Leo DiCaprio went through, and the kind of battling against the elements. Obviously, it's the opposite kind of elements. It's like the very north of America, that kind of Alaskan sort of landscape, but I suppose it's that kind of thing of kind of man conquering and how brutal man is to other man, you know, and that kind of thing.
But like, I wonder if when there was the Oscar campaign for Deliverance, whether they were like, these stunts are real, these actors went through all these things.
That's true.
I don't know if that happened, whereas for Revenant, it was just like the main thing. People like Leonardo DiCaprio almost died making this film.
Yes, that's all we ever heard about.
Whereas it's like,
he ate bison.
You watch Deliverance, you're like any moment this person could have like just fallen over into the hill and like break their fucking leg or something. It's just like, but I don't think he was that much of a big deal at this time.
No, it's and that's right. Yeah, it's true. It's true. It doesn't feel like it's being smug in any way about the filmmaking, but the filmmaking is just so good throughout.
Squeal louder, 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 get down there, boy.
What really interested me about the rape is that there's not much paid attention to the actual victim, how they feel afterwards.
No,
it's kind of like it just happens, and then they're like, okay, he just follows the others to like do whatever they would decide to do. And even at the end, when he's having like dinner with his family and stuff, because he survives, it's not really addressed at all, and he
It's
doesn't
not.
seem to have much trauma or anything. And I was just kind of, I mean, whatever, maybe he doesn't have trauma, like whatever, good for him or whatever. But it was just weird that the film didn't pay more attention to that character.
It is really interesting.
He was kind of just like this thing that people had to protect.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of just like, just stay here and we'll do the rest, and you just do nothing and whatever. But not in the sense that you need rest, just more in the sense that you can't do anything. You can't defend yourself. You're useless. Just stay here and pay attention to Burt Reynolds' like broken leg. Just do nothing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, oh, there are people in this world who get hurt and you have to protect them. A little bit, I think.
It is. It's a little bit like it could be seen as just a kind of device.
Yeah.
It's the thing that triggers them killing the guy, and then starts the story on its way.
Yeah, yeah.
And because it's almost I don't think any of them really talk about it. But again, I suppose that's kind of interesting again, and it adds to that masculinity thing that none of them want to acknowledge that just happened.
But it's weird because like I don't remember any scenes in the film where there's this sense that there is this thing that we're not talking about. It's just the film is like, you don't talk about it, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's not like there's this sense where they want to talk about it but they can't because they're men or something. It's more like the film pretends that it's not a thing.
It's not a thing,
which is so strange to me.
Interesting. I don't know. I think there is a bit of it. I think I could see it in Ned Beatty's performance, and even though he doesn't talk about it, and he kind of, you can see it in his face, and I think he, the fact that he so deliberately, I think, does sink into the background from that point onwards, and he is silent.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it is
That's
that
true.
he is in shock or something.
Yeah.
But again, it's that kind of thing of, well, you're a man, you can't cry and scream about it for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
You're just going to shut up, basically. And again, it kind of adds to that feeling of, oh, none of us men know how to deal with what just happened.
Yeah.
Let's just not talk about it, any of us, kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know whether that's deliberate or not. That's kind of what I got
that's the thing.
from it.
I don't know if it's to show the characters being like this, or if the filmmaker himself couldn't see through it and was just like, you just don't talk about it, right?
Yeah.
But that's why it's very interesting to watch just in general just now. And it was very interesting about the film is you have these 4 men, and everyone is sort of trying to act the way that they think the others they think they're supposed to act.
Yeah.
Or initially they think they don't have to do this, and they're just being themselves, and everyone's like, oh, you're stupid, oh, you're annoying, like, stop being like this. But then after this accident happens, it's more like everyone has to be the way that the others are saying you should be. Like, everyone listens to Burt Reynolds, and then everyone listens to Jon Voight, and it's more like this thing where that's I think what's very the toxic masculinity it's the meaning of toxic masculinity is an ideal of masculinity that hurts men themselves when they want to adopt it. And both Dustin Hoffman in Straw Dogs has that, obviously, because he's so obsessed with this that he just all this chaos and stuff. But I think also in Deliverance there's this thing with Burt Reynolds and all the other men, like the man who's raped, he can't, in the context of this masculinity, he's not allowed to cry, he's not allowed to do anything, he's supposed to, he doesn't know how to react, he can't even, like, he doesn't want to fight people. Like Jon Voight, there's this scene where he has to kill this guy, and then he's like holding his face, he's like, I'm sorry, I don't want to kill you,
can't do it. But
it's kind of the excuse or some of it for him to do it is this survival thing. But this is amazing, this bit, because they think that this guy that Jon Voight goes up the cliff to kill, they think that he's the guy who shot their friend. So that's why he goes up there to kill him, so that that this man doesn't kill them. But then there is this huge doubt whether did this man actually kill our friend, or did we just imagine it, or did we just kill this man because we were scared, or because we thought that we had the right to? And that's the whole like thing. It's like, you think that he's killing him for survival because he's like defending himself, but then there's this big doubt, like, did he need to do this? Did he defend himself, or did he just kill him because Burt Reynolds told him to do it, because Burt Reynolds wants to kill people?
Exactly.
Because he thinks that makes him like a
hunter
or something.
And it was just another random guy from this community that they got rid of. And then there's that moment when, but it does kind of then give you the out, doesn't it? When they take his front teeth come out, and it's like, oh, okay, he is the guy that attacked us. But again, it does resolve.
But there's this moment of doubt where you're like, oh my god, did Burt Reynolds just really want to kill someone, or did he want to defend himself? And I think that's a brilliant bit of you have Jon Voight like just trying to help his brother, and just like, oh my god, what did he make me do? Why did I kill a guy, and he's like, oh, it's too late anyway. Now he's dead.
Yeah,
And it's just amazing. It's like, yeah,
it's really interesting. The only thing that I never know whether I like is the kind of the it feels like there's a bit of an extended ending, I suppose. You know, when they do get to safety and they get out of the river, it still goes on for like another 15 minutes after that, you know, and they all go and they have dinner and they all go home to their, you know, we see everything kind of get resolved. What do you think of that? Do you think that that's kind of needed?
I don't know that it's very great, because I thought one thing that was very interesting throughout the film is that they keep talking about their wives and stuff.
Yes.
But you don't see them. And I thought that was great, because it's like, oh yeah, that explains, you know, you don't need, it's like it puts immediately their lives into this image of what you're supposed to be. And there's this bit where Burt Reynolds tells Jon Voight, you have a nice wife, you have a nice house, and Jon Voight's like, well, you make it sound kind of shitty. But like that's the point. It's like you're supposed to see, I thought you were supposed to see these characters as like this city man with a nice wife and a nice home. But then when you meet them, I'm not sure, like it just feels like, okay, is this, I don't think it adds much.
No, it doesn't add much,
because you
does
just
it?
have this scene, this kind of not necessary scene of Jon Voight like crying at dinner, and you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, sure, like he's crying. Just, I understand that he would be crying, but I guess it's just a way to show again that he's crying, but they don't talk about it and stuff.
Yes, it's like,
but
that
I don't
it's
think
still
you
with
need
them.
it. Yeah, it's like I don't think you need it. Obviously, he's gonna be traumatized with it forever. It's better probably to just cut it there and just let people like, imagine the thing.
I think so. I think, you know, had the entire film been set in that isolated kind of rural area around the river and we never left it, I think that might have added more in
because
a way.
it becomes all about like whether the police believe them, and it would be stronger to be like, yes, they believe them, and that's what's kind of tragic. Is that because they're city men and because they had the upper end on these hillbillies, we believe them, and we believe the hillbillies are bad, but that's not literally what happens.
No,
maybe
exactly.
It's probable that Jon Voight killed someone even without even knowing he was the guy. I mean, it's like there's all these nuances that would be just ignored because they're city boys and they're hillbillies, and that would be so much more like 70s in a way. It would. Like, oh, life is horrible and unfair, and you think you're great, but because you have this privilege.
However,
it's strange. I don't know why they did that.
I do really like the last dream sequence though, and I like the last shot of him lying in bed next to his wife, still thinking about it as the credits roll. I think that's really nice, that it's like, oh shit, it's still going to be lingering with him forever.
Yeah,
I do like that, but I think maybe they could have done that quite easily by not having to show us all that other stuff. But
I think it would have been already better to just have the police believe them. Would get rid of all that thing. That would be more maybe less realistic, but more. I mean, it's an insane movie already. So it's just
exactly.
Okay, just, you know,
exactly.
But it's kind of weird because the rest of the film feels more like subtle, and like things like are not said, and that's how you're thinking of things, and then at the end it kind of says those things, and you're like, okay, well, I didn't need this.
Because actually the dialogue is very sparse. Did you find, like, again, very male in a way, like they don't talk unless they have to, and actually there are huge long chunks of this movie where there is no dialogue. It's just, and actually the music is used quite sparingly too, and a lot of the time there's no music. It's just the sounds of nature and these guys doing what they have to do. You know,
but it's really funny because for most of the film they don't talk, but it's literally, the film literally starts with shots of them in the car with just them talking non-stop about like stupid stuff and about their trip as well. But it's really it's like they go from being this modern man who talk and, you know, have fun, relaxed conversations to like these men who like of few words, who only speak when it's really necessary.
From that kind of, you know, that kind of murder and rape set piece onwards, it's like it's very quiet, isn't it, from that point onwards? It's really interesting. Do you think that these two movies, Straw Dogs and Deliverance, have they kind of dated well? Do you think they still hold up all these years later?
I think Straw Dogs definitely, probably not the way it was perceived at the time. I don't know. I haven't really read reviews from the time. I think I did one like last year, but I don't remember. I think so. I think Deliverance, I don't know, because I think it's maybe a bit less like interesting on all those aspects of like
a bit less, you know, subversive. The new man.
It's less subversive and stuff. But it's still like it's amazing to watch it now and think, okay, like canoeing, like men actors canoeing, but also just I think it's like the topic of like male on male rape. I don't think it's that often addressed.
No,
and maybe this film doesn't do it like incredibly well, but I don't think it does it very badly either.
No,
and
I think it's
I mean, it must have been. Maybe that was like an Oscar shocking thing at the time. Like, oh yeah, there's this insane scene in the film. Have you seen it and stuff? But it still feels to me quite like well made and interesting.
And actually, I still think that's quite. I think people would still be shocked by that now. I feel like we don't get stuff like that. And again, if there was a film about hillbillies raping a man, that would not be nominated for Oscars anymore.
No, I don't think so.
Like,
unless it was, I don't know, even if it was Martin Scorsese doing it, I don't think it would be like,
definitely
you know what I mean?
Not. No,
yeah,
no.
Maybe it's not like it's weird. It's like you'd think like progress just works with like time, but that's not true.
No, it doesn't.
It just keeps going back.
It goes backwards and forwards, definitely. Brilliant. Lena, thank you so much for joining me. Last couple of questions I ask everyone. What's your favourite horror movie?
Oh, favorite of all time? Probably Texas Chainsaw.
Nice, good
Massacre.
choice. Good choice.
Because it's not because it's one of the only ones I've seen actually, because I saw it a few times and it still is the best. Because it's completely terrifying, and but also just so weirdly pleasurable watching it because you're aware that you're watching like one of the best films.
It's just expertly made.
It is so thrilling to watch a film like this.
Yes.
I don't know how it happened. I think like the stars were aligned, everything was perfect, and they made this incredible film.
Yes. What about your scariest movie or your scariest movie experience? Would it be that as well, or?
No, I don't think. I mean, it's very scary, but it's not the same. It's more like a dread.
Yes.
In Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah.
Scary. The film that makes me sick is, as I said, Trouble Every Day. That just I can't handle it. But it's amazing as well. So it's like you're watching, you're like, oh my god, amazing. I want to puke right now.
To die.
Yes. But that's one that made me feel really horrible. Scariest. I don't know.
Yeah, it's different, isn't it? There's different levels of scary and there's different types of things. Yeah. Interesting. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And just tell us again, where can people find you if they want to find you on social media and stuff you've written, that kind of thing?
Well, I'm on Twitter at ELAZIC, Lazic, my name, pretty much. And I also I write regularly for like Little White Lies and stuff like that. And yeah, I have a website that's elenalazic.wordpress.com with all my writing.
Wonderful.
And yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my guest, Elena Lazic, joining me on the podcast for the first time to discuss Straw Dogs and Deliverance. They're not easy movies to discuss really in depth. They're quite heavy going. So a huge thank you to Elena for joining me to discuss those guys. Thank God I had you there with me. So what do you think of these two movies? Are you a fan? I mean, Straw Dogs especially, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you still think that the movie is kind of problematic and difficult and uncomfortable and awkward to watch, like I do? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. And don't forget, there is also a Facebook discussion group that's growing and growing every week. It's got a really lovely community of people now who all get involved, discuss the horror genre. They've even met up a couple of times. So please do, if you're interested, if you like talking horror, get involved, join the group, and you can chat about anything and everything horror related with fellow listeners. So now is the time when I get to tease what we're going to be covering next week. Now, I did mention it briefly in my chat there with Eleanor, if you noticed. I'm very, very, very excited about next week, because next week just happens to be a review of the greatest horror movie of all time. It's been mentioned quite a few times on this series alone while we've been talking about folk horror, but it's been mentioned so many times by so many guests and critics and experts and filmmakers throughout the entire history of this podcast. So next week I'm going to be joined by a very well respected and esteemed film critic. For the first time, he's editor-at-large of Total Film magazine, and this is his favourite horror movie of all time. And it's also my favourite horror movie of all time. I mean, I think it's most people's favourite horror movie of all time, at least most people with taste. We are going to be discussing Tobe Hooper's 1974 movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's all we're going to be discussing, but we will of course be talking about this movie in depth, in spoilerific detail. If you haven't seen The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, My God. I mean, first of all, you are in for a treat. And secondly, please don't miss out on this incredible cinematic masterpiece, especially before hearing it discussed inside and out in what I think is going to be a really fun and interesting discussion next week. So join us then for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.